Dear Thally and your YouTube psychic. Card of the day. Readings. Unboxings. Your daily source for things arcane.
Hey everyone, it's Dear Thalion, your YouTube psychic, and today's video I have to give you another trigger warning. We are dealing again with the suspects in the Jack the Ripper or Whitechapel murders. So, things that will trigger you may include murder, serial killer, disembowelment, decomposition, any of those things. Please skip this video. If not, please enjoy. Some theories suggest that the killer was a doctor, possibly even an educated upper-class individual who ventured into the seedy Whitechapel district from a more well-to-do area. While this may be somewhat plausible, the notion of such a character being the Ripper largely draws upon the cultural perceptions such as fear of the medical profession, distrust of modern science, or the exploitation of the poor by the rich. Many think the Ripper was a common worker, possibly a butcher or other tradesman, who lived locally and was employed during the week, explaining why the murders occurred on or near the weekend. A lot of experts also agree that the Ripper was a local to Whitechapel. Many of the alleged suspects were proposed years after the investigation took place, having been linked by contemporary documents or any other remote connection to the case. Some of the accused suspects include many famous names, many of whom were not even considered in the initial police investigation. Being that anyone around at the time of the Ripper murders has long been dead, modern-day authors are free to propose anyone as a suspect without accountability or need for any substantial historical evidence. Now, don't forget also that all of these individuals are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, even posthumous in this case. However, we are not in a court of law. We are again in my spare bedroom, which I call my office. So, no one's going to be found guilty here today. Tumblet, an Irish-American, made a small fortune posing as an Indian herb doctor throughout the United States and Canada and was largely perceived as a woman-hating quack. He was connected to the death of one of his patients in Boston, but managed to escape prosecution after being held for 3 weeks in prison. Tumblet despised all women, but claimed to possess a particular hatred for prostitutes. He had claimed to be soured on women after an earlier failed marriage to a prostitute. Tumblet hosted an all-male dinner party in Washington, D.C., at which he displayed a collection of preserved female reproductive organs, proudly boasting that they had come from every class of woman. In 1865, he was arrested for complicity in the Abraham Lincoln assassination, but was released without charge. While in England in 1888, Tumblet was arrested on November 7th on charges of gross indecency, apparently for engaging in homosexuality, which was a criminal offense at the time. Tumblet fled to France while on bail and awaiting his trial, then later went back to the United States, having been a notorious figure in the U.S. for his dubious self-promotion and prior criminal charges. His arrest in England reported him in connection with the Ripper murders. American reports that Scotland Yard tried to extradite him were not confirmed by the British press or London police, and the New York City police said there is no proof of his complicity in the Whitechapel murders, and crime for which he is under bond in London is not extraditable. In 1913, Tumblet was mentioned as a Ripper suspect by Chief Inspector John Littlechild of the Metropolitan Police Service in a letter to a journalist, and also considering that he was pegged as a homosexual, I can see why they would post him as a suspect at this time, seeing as it was a criminal offense back then. However, most likely, most homosexuals are not violent, most. In any case, I mean, I can speak for myself. I'm not very violent. At least I don't think so. I've never had the inclination to slit a woman's throat from ear to ear. Nor do I have any intentions or inclinations of field dressing a woman. But, to each their own. William Henry Barry, or Bury, was executed in Dundee, Scotland, for the murder of his wife. Due to certain similarities between the crimes, and because Bury had been a resident of London's East End during the time of the Ripper murders, Bury was highly suspected by the media as well as by his hangman, James Barry. Bury had been living in Bow, London during the time of the Ripper murders with his wife Ellen, a former prostitute. He and Ellen later moved to Dundee, Scotland when Barry was arrested and tried and hanged for Ellen's murder. On the night of February 4, 1889, Barry strangled Ellen to death with a rope. Shortly afterwards, Barry inflicted several post-mortem abdominal wounds with a penknife, then stuffed her body into a trunk which he kept hidden in their flat for 6 days. On February 10, 1889, Barry went into the Dundee Central Police Station and reported Ellen's suicide to Lieutenant James Parr. Barry claimed to have woken the next day after a drunken stupor, only to find his wife on the floor with a rope around her neck. Rather than seek out a doctor for help, Barry told Parr that he instead cut the body and hid it in the trunk they used to pack belongings in during their move from London. Barry confessed to feeling guilty about his intent to conceal the body and expressed fear that he may be arrested as, quote, Jack the Ripper, end quote. After listening to the ridiculous confession, Parr took Barry upstairs to see the head of the detective department, Lieutenant David Lamb. "This man has a wonderful story to tell you," Parr told Lamb. Barry's retelling of his tale to Detective Lamb differed slightly in that he claimed to have only stabbed Ellen once, and also left out the mention of his fear of being arrested as Jack the Ripper. Barry was searched and detained pending further inquiry. After Ellen's body was discovered by detectives while searching the dingy flat, Lamb immediately charged Barry with Ellen's murder. Further investigation revealed the length of rope Barry had used to strangle Ellen, complete with strands of Ellen's hair still caught in the fibers, as well as a large penknife caked with blood and bits of human flesh. Blood-stained clothes was also found, in addition to some of Ellen's personal effects, burned in the fireplace. The flat was devoid of furniture, suggesting that it may have been burned as a means to heat the room, or in an attempt to destroy evidence. Chalk graffiti containing Jack the Ripper references was found on the back door of Barry's flat, as well as in the stairwell leading up from the back of the property. The markings read, "Jack Ripper is at the back of this door," and "Jack Ripper is in this cellar." Respectively, it was thought that a local boy may have been responsible for the graffiti, but the precise identity of the writer was never determined. Shortly before his execution, Barry admitted to killing Ellen. On April 22, 1889, Barry wrote a confession, which he asked to be withheld until after his death. Barry claims to have strangled Ellen while in the midst of a drunken tiff over money. He then states that he tried to dismember the body the following day for ease of disposal, but became too squeamish to continue. This statement differs from expert physicians' testimonies who determined at the inquest that the incisions were made within at most 10 minutes of the time of death. Unable to continue with the supposed dismemberment, Barry then decided to stuff her body into the trunk. Fearing Ellen's disappearance would be noted, Barry then concocted the story about her suicide. Despite extreme suspicion by the media and by his hangman, James Barry adamantly denied any connection between he and the Ripper murders. Police investigated a possible link, but Barry and the Whitechapel murders, but found no substantial evidence and discounted him as a suspect. Dr. Thomas Neil Cream was born the oldest of 8 siblings in Glasgow, Scotland, and later moved with his family to Quebec, Canada. There, he studied medicine at McGill University Medical School, married and opened a medical practice in London, Ontario. His wife soon died after a mysterious illness. After moving to Chicago, Cream moved his practice to the edge of the red light district, performing illegal abortions for local prostitutes. He was suspected in the death of one woman during that period of time, but was acquitted of any charges. Justice was more difficult to dodge, however, when Cream was accused of murdering Daniel Stott in 1881. Stott suffered from epilepsy, and his wife Julia, 30 years his junior, would pick up his medication from Cream. Julia and Cream began an affair and conspired to give Stott pills contaminated with strychnine. Cream was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, but was released after 10 years. Cream arrived in London October of 1891, settling in Lambeth. Soon afterward, prostitutes in the area began to die from strychnine poisoning. Nellie Donworth, Alice Marsh, and Emma Shriver were 3 victims who managed to describe the tall, mustached man who had recently given them medicine as they lay dying in agony. Matilda Clover was another prostitute found dead and was believed to have suffered from complications of alcoholism. Soon afterward, though, an anonymous letter arrived at Scotland Yard which accused 2 other doctors of being responsible for her murder. Soon afterward, Dr. Cream came in contact with a visiting New York City police officer and with much bravado took him on tour of crime sites in the recent Lambeth poisoner murders. Officers put Dr. Cream under surveillance and soon took him into custody. Cream was convicted of the murder of Matilda Clover in October 1891 and sentenced to hang. He was executed on November 16, 1892. His last words before the noose snapped his neck were, "I am Jack." The record shows that Dr. Cream was serving his prison sentence in Chicago at the time of the Whitechapel killings. However, some believe that through corruption and bribery he could have been released prior to that point, and a double could have served the prison sentence in his place. Regardless of his connection to the Ripper killings, or lack thereof, the diabolical Dr. Cream is still an interesting figure.
Thanks for watching today's video. Don't forget to subscribe to my content and like this video. Want more? Feel free to order your own personal reading at www.tirthalion.com. That's TIRTHALION.com. Don't forget to click the bell icon so that you're notified every time I upload a